There we go, 8 o'clock. How you doing, people? Welcome to the Sports Therapy Association podcast. How are you? It's Sleep Awareness Month still, which I've been loving. And I must start off by thanking people who have been taking the time to email in to me and putting stuff on social media and just sharing it. It seems to be really popular. Because it's affecting you guys. I was just talking previously with my guest. It's obviously been a month where it's helping you guys as individuals to become better therapists by just being more alert and learning more and stuff, which is great. So yeah, I appreciate all the feedback which we've received today, and it's going to continue. We've got another 2, which I'm really excited about. Before I bring up tonight's guest, I just want to give a huge thanks to Dr. Olivia Walsh. From last week, where it was all about sleep wearables. Quite a few interesting conversations going on across social media based on what Dr. Olivia Walsh had to say last week. Let's bring up a photo there. So there she is. Yeah, it was good. It was interesting. Some people were a little bit taken back that the data that was being shown to do with you've got this amount percentage of REM sleep and this amount of deep sleep and so on. You might not really want to pay too much attention to that, especially if it's kind of saying something which goes against how you feel. But Olivia did a great job in talking about what you can use wearables for and where to kind of place your efforts if you are using them. So yeah, really worth looking at. If you do want to catch up with it, then simply go to your favorite podcast app, type in the Sports Therapy Association, it'll come up. And also this is going out to Run Chat Live. It's so important. I've decided to rekindle the fires of Run Chat Live podcast after a couple of years. I'm uploading to that as well, because obviously it's important, not just to therapists, but to runners as well, which is obviously my passion. So yeah, you can find it on both of those podcasts, or if you want to watch the video, which I always recommend, especially with Olivia last week, who was so expressive and passionate. It's worth watching it. What a maths teacher. Maths is her passion. And if you want to wish on what your maths teacher was like and how they could have interested you in class, then just watch a few minutes of Olivia, and there's your blueprint for a great maths teacher. So there you go. You can watch that on YouTube if you want to, on the Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel. So people are coming in the room. It is recorded live. So if you do want to join us live, it's 8 o'clock. At the moment, it's GMT +1. I always say I must remember to ask my guest about this controversy around should we have a +1? Should the hours be shifting around just because summer's come? So mind me someone if I forget about it to ask about that. Catherine Reimer has joined us. Hi, Catherine. If you do decide to join us live, then I can basically bring your questions up on the screen. You can't see that now if you listen to the podcast, but if you watch the YouTube, you'll see. So it's a great way to meet other like-minded therapists. If you're in the UK, then it's a great way to network. There's bound to be people in your area. The Sports Therapy Association reps generally come and hang out here. So it's a great way to network and get some support. Sabrina Monaghan has joined us as well. Hi, Sabrina. Hope you're well. Becky Carroll is in here as well. Evening all says, Becky, I missed last week. Shame on you, Becky, but don't worry. So I must catch up. Make sure you tell me when you have. Thanks, Becky. Good to see you here. Catherine Reimer as well. Apologies always come in. This is how we roll in the STA. We get the apologies out of the way first of all. Catherine says, sorry, I missed last week. I ironically was really tired. Well, that's okay. I can't force you to stay up and watch this if you're tired. That's what we're talking about. Just have a little think about why you were tired, Catherine. Okay, just have a little think about why. So yeah, but thanks for joining us tonight, Catherine, and other people are flooding as well now. So thank you very much for joining us live. Like I say, if you do want to join us live, then it's 8 o'clock at GMT +1, which is what time it is in the UK. So tonight we're going to be talking about injury and performance. So really relevant to the Sports Therapy Association listeners. As soft tissue therapists, you're going to get people obviously coming into you who, if they are recreational athletes of whatever level, they're going to be either coming to you with an injury problem or they're going to be looking to improve their performance. And that's what our guest, Dr. Jonathan Charest, specializes in. And he's going to be discussing that tonight. And then next week, Dr. Amy Bender from Cerebra, the director of clinical sleep there, is going to be with us at the same time. That's going to be really exciting for me because Amy is going to be giving the results to the 5-week in-home polysomnogram study that I did from the comfort of my own room, with all the EEG signals being measured and rapid eye movement and muscular difference between various parts of my skull and muscles. So that's going to be really exciting, and talking about the state of a wearable which is actually taking brainwaves. So that's going to be Amy next week. So I think that's everything I need. Checking my crib sheet. Haven't missed anything on. No, not at all. If you are listening to the podcast, then please, always say this every week. Do me a favor and just leave a rating, subscribe, leave some nice stars there. It just helps the information from our fantastic guests get out to more people, which is what this is all about. No one's getting any money out of this. It's all just about spreading the good word and kind of helping everyone out there. So if you could leave a review and a star, 5 would be nicest, then that really just helps the podcast appear in Google. That's what it's all about. So please do that. It takes no time at all if you've got an iPhone. If you're on Android, then understand you probably have to go to your garden and say a spell and run around in a circle or something. It's really tricky. But with an iPhone, it takes 2 seconds. Okay, so please go and do that. Right, I've left him alone down in the lobby for long enough now. So if you'd like to get comfortable and get your notepads out, I shall bring up Dr. Jonathan Charest. Hey, Jonathan, how you doing?
I'm good. Yourself, Matt?
Really good. Very excited. I'm already animated by having the pleasure of spending 5 or 10 minutes with you before we've gone live. So thank you so much for joining us. Where are you talking from today?
I'm in Calgary at the Center for Sleep and Human Performance. This is in Canada, for those who doesn't know. So I'm across that little pond of yours here.
Yeah, the lovely little pond, which is actually looking quite nice now. Actually, we've had some great weather. We've got spring is well underway here, well, down in the south of the UK where I am. So yeah, so thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. You come very much recommended by everyone we've spoken to so far. In fact, you're working and have got stuff going on with both Jesse Cook and Dr. Walsh as well, haven't you? You've got some stuff going on and coming out soon.
Yeah, we have a manuscript that we are working on for the NBA, so the National Basketball Association. We have one also on the NHL, the National Hockey League, here in Canada and United States. And we also have some work on student athletes. We have some work also on marathoners. So we have quite a lot going on, actually, with Jesse and the group.
There's quite a lot going on. I would recommend, if anyone likes to geek out, then just type in any of the names of my guests and you'll find an awful lot of fantastic papers, a lot of them which it just says if you want a full text and contact the author. Some of them are behind a bit of a paywall, but there's always ways to get to see these if you know the right people. But yeah, so for example, our guest tonight, Dr. Jonathan Charest, I think there's over 20 different articles online. Let me bring these up on full screen so you can have a little look. This was one with Amy from last week, and also Celian Bastian and C. Samuels. So that was a paper on Canadian national team speed skaters. I've just taken a selection of 3 here. There was one with Dr. Meeta Singh, who nearly we had on the show, but unfortunately Dr. Singh had another engagement which suddenly came up in Chicago. Very sought after speaker as well. So there's another paper there which I'd recommend you guys to have a look at, with Jonathan Charest, Stephen Bird and Michael Workings. And then more recently, only last year I think it was, with Michael Grandner, whose name's come up as well, as we were talking last week on wearables, and with Jesse about an introduction to sleep. So lots and lots of papers up there for the geeks of you who like to have a look at the research, which is always recommended. Then yeah, lots up there. Does that mean things are getting better, Jonathan? The amount of papers that have come out, are things changing now in this decade? Are we getting better information and more answers to the relationship between sleep and sports performance?
I think we are being exposed to more information. So I think nowadays athletes and IST and support group are taking care now more and more of sleep, as they did recognize how of an important factor it plays into the mental health, the mental well-being, the recovery, but also ultimately the performance of everyone. So I think this is now on the right direction, and we are facing now the good problem of discerning what is a good information and what is not a good information, because of how many articles we are getting now.
I noticed recently, actually, I mean, I'm in my bubble on Twitter, so I've been now a month just looking at everything. I've got my sleep people list, my sleep peeps, and so. But I noticed Dr. Singh, for example, was very happy about some success she was having with, I can't remember the name of the basketball team now. Where's she? Who'd she work with?
She's working with the Pelicans of New Orleans.
There you go. So it must be very exciting when you are getting involved now, concentrating on athletes' performance with this information you're finding in studies, and see actually the proofs in the pudding that it's actually making a difference.
Well, that's what we like to see, is when we enter and start working with a team and athletes, we have a plan of action, and ultimately, if we are part of the improvement of 1 or 2%, this is how you actually improve an entire team. You will not make the difference of 50% of the team, but at this level, at this eliteness level, 1 or 2% is what is needed and required to make the difference between a final and missing the final, and making the playoff and not making the playoff. And I think this is what sleep brings on the table, is that 1 or 2% edge compared to the other teams and athletes.
What's the history like in elite sport? You've had the pleasure, I'm sure, and the challenge of working with elite athletes. How long have teams been actually drawing on the services of sleep professionals to help?
Well, some have been working with sleep coaches and sleep specialists for quite some time. Just, of course, I'm biased. I'm the sleep guy here, so I truly think that a sleep specialist, a sleep clinician, should be on board for the entire year with a professional team. The way they are currently using it is at the beginning of the year for a sleep presentation, quick evaluation, and then off they go. Sleep, as you all know, is a very dynamic process. So, and it does have a lot of inter individualities, meaning that in a team, you may have rookies, freshmen, so they're 20, 21 years old, and you will also have your veteran, which will be, let's call them 30 and 32 years old. You will not assess the sleep the same way for these athletes, but they are within the same team. So throughout the year, your veteran guy may have some difficulties with a kid at home, which the 21-year-old probably will not have. The 21-year-old may have more difficulty with night lifestyle, for example. And
Mhm.
these are different approaches that a sleep clinician can make. And therefore, at the end of the day, you may make a difference, but you need to come with a individualized plan of action within the team, not a plan that will cover the entire team. This is a recipe for failure.
So amongst the elites, because there is this, I work with runners, for example. So a lot of club runners will look at what the elites are doing and kind of mimic it and copy it. So amongst the elites, is there quite good education when it comes to sleep hygiene, or do you find that the athletes themselves are still fairly oblivious, or there's a lot of misconceptions still?
In terms of sleep hygiene, I would say that runners, so a long distance runner, are typically quite well aware of what a good sleep hygiene is. However, a good sleep hygiene does not necessarily mean you're not struggling with sleep. So a good night of sleep will mean that you are waking up refreshed. Ultimately, that's what you're looking at. If you're sleeping 8 hours because of your good sleep hygiene, but you wake up unrefreshed, what good does it do sleeping 8 hours? Ultimately, it does nothing. You're wasting your time. So when we approach athletes, the first question is, how do you feel in the morning? Typically, well, for 3 days of a week, I'm good, and the rest, it's so on and so forth. Okay, so half of the time, basically, you're struggling. So let's check why. And if we only look at sleep hygiene, we will not find anything except and nowadays we have the difficulty of putting the phone away, putting the screen down. But this is a very easy fix. And then the most difficult and challenging fix is the culture behind the sport. So when you talk about long distance runner, what do you mostly find on the weekend? It's their long run, their long, easy run, which is typically due or done early in the morning. So they have a perfect opportunity to actually bank their sleep on the weekend. But because of the culture of long run being done in the morning, because there's less people, it's less hot, less sunny, you can name all the excuses in the book. They are trading hour of sleep to actually increase their mileage. And then this will accumulate throughout weeks, month, year. And then ultimately they're crashing and they're wondering why. Because they had let that sleep debt cripple on them slowly but surely.
So in other words, then athletes, even at high levels, are believing that it's better to sacrifice sleep to get that good training session in, rather than adjust their training session to keep the sleep. They're doing it the
Uh,
wrong way around.
it's always a balanced way of approaching this. So, as a sleep clinician, you don't want to throw away the entire culture of their sport and the entire routine. The best course of action is picking one battle at a time. So you're looking at the total sleep time, and okay, so based on what we're seeing, I believe you're missing a couple of hours here and there. In order to not change anything, can we just incorporate napping in your schedule, in your daily schedule, weekly schedule? And then we start there. Ultimately, are we winning? Are we improving your quality of life? Are we improving the quantity of mileage and the quality of your mileage? Are we improving the restful sensation? If the athletes come back and say, well, I'm better, but I'm not quite there yet, I'm missing that it factor, then we may get on the cultural sports side of, okay, so which morning, so let's say you have three early morning training, can we address one? I'm not saying we should never train in the morning, but can we use one to our advantage to make sure that your early morning training do not become a burden for your recovery and ultimately your performance?
That's very interesting. Yes, that's advice we've seen a few times from professionals like yourself, is you mustn't go in there gung-ho telling the athlete how they're doing everything wrong and they need to be doing this, because it could lead to disaster. So it's, picking one little thing you could tweak at a time to get a positive outcome. That's very interesting. Questions are coming up. I'm going to address this one straight away. Check out me keeping an eye on the questions already. We're only 10 minutes in. But Becky, I remember you mentioning this a few times. So I'm going to put this to Jonathan now. I'll bring it up on the screen and read it out for people who are listening. Becky says, good point. I've always been a good sleeper. When I struggled with a deficiency in B12, I would have 8 hours sleep and routinely wake up feeling like I'd only had 2 hours sleep. Horrid. Okay, so there we go. Proof in the pud. 8 hours, but not helping.
No, that's exactly the point. So when you enter the room with athletes, a team, or a individual athlete or coaches, you don't want to bring on the table and be in and start the discussion being confrontational. You're asking what is the problem, and here's what the theory says, and now let's try to apply that theory on your reality setting. How can we make these fine-tuning changes? So for example, the B12 deficiency, I don't have the material to actually test everyone B12 on the go in the clinic, but it's always something that we need to keep in the back of our head as, well, I'm the sleep specialist, I think I'm doing a great job, but on the nutritional side, could we benefit from a dietitian? Absolutely. So that would be the responsibility of the sleep clinician to stay within their lane, and say, well, my sleep is now according to the standard of that athlete, but we're not getting quite there yet. I believe there may be some deficiency in some nutrient. Then we need to work from a multidisciplinary approach now. The sleep guy cannot do it all, unfortunately. I wish, but I don't.
So from listening to you there, it's obviously you can't attend to everybody one by one and do specific tests, but it sounds like, and I know there is, it's a bit of a leading question, but there needs to be some form of questionnaire or kind of screening initially, doesn't there, with certain questions down. This can be done with elite athletes, maybe easier, but with people coming into clinic, especially if they're suffering from pain or coming in saying they're plateauing, they're not performing well anymore, they think they just need a massage to sort it out. At that point, by putting a few questions about sleep on the kind of PAR-Q, which we're always doing with a new client, is it possible then maybe to give them a sleep-specific questionnaire which could help identify other things which are worth looking into and maybe referring them to a specialist?
Well, definitely. So for elite athletes, there is that questionnaire, the athlete sleep screening questionnaire, ASSQ, that's been developed in 2016 and been validated by your next visitor, Dr. Amy Bender. This is the only sleep questionnaire for athletes. So with that questionnaire, you can have a good sense on who should be referred where and who should not be referred. So the idea with referral is to make sure that we do not overburden the system. And then ultimately with the population that is not an elite athlete, depending on what you're looking, there's questionnaire that will address insomnia, such as the Insomnia Severity Index. You have sleepiness that can be assessed with different questionnaire. There's a sleep quality. But ultimately, even if you have these questionnaire with the total score, there's nothing like a clinician and the professional asking, how do you do? How do you feel in the morning? And patient and client are very quick onto complaining about sleep and how refresh or unrefreshed they are. And then that opens you the door to go a little bit deeper. And with that, the referral system can be done quite well. Should not say easily because it should have, everyone would do it, but every specialist should assess pain, nutrition, sleep, and physical activity, in my opinion, and from there see where we should refer them.
Great advice. So that's been a constant theme on the show in the last kind of 96 episodes of focusing on the subjective, giving enough, even if, I mean, again, it's so interesting, isn't it? I had this with a younger therapist I was chatting to the other week. Is if somebody comes in and they're expecting an hour massage, 60 minutes, and you start going off on all these screening protocols, and suddenly 20 minutes to go, you say, right, we better do a bit of massage, that person's probably not going to come back. So it's really important not to get too caught up and to look at the individual in front of you and check expectation, explain to them, look, I'd like to go down this a little bit more. Should we do it now or should we book it another week? But there is an awful lot we need to be including in the subjective over a period of time, which probably is being missed out, isn't there?
Oh, definitely. So I think a good clinician and a good health professional is the key factor. And one of the key factor is to pay attention to the variable that matters. And what these questionnaire or these trackers will help you do is highlight these factor. Ultimately, that leaves you with the last decision of, do I pay attention to it or not? So you do not rely entirely on them. You do rely on your clinical judgment. So for every screening tool you may use, the way we work here is we send our questionnaire before the appointment. So we don't lose any time of their appointment of 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 1 hour to actually go on the questionnaire with them. It's their homework. And then that also tells you how dedicated they are to actually improve themselves. And that tells you a lot about the patient or client you have in front of you. So ultimately what you want is pay attention to the real issue. And sometimes with too much data, you may get caught up in the weeds and you're not helping your patient.
Yeah. Very good advice. Yeah, that's one thing that's probably come out of COVID-19 is the use of pre-consultation screens and questionnaires, and even virtual consultations if the person wants to see you, have a little chat beforehand and to get stuff out. So I'm interested, people who have joined us live, especially people who have been tracking us now for the last kind of nearly 100 episodes. We've been telling you an awful lot of questions you need to be asking in the subjective, whether it's to do with female pelvic health or male pelvic health or rheumatology or hypermobility. And now we're putting on sleep as well. And next month we're putting on nutrition. So how do you manage to fit this all in? Are you struggling? Do you find that, or do you succeed in breaking it down over the period of a few consultations? I can't remember who it was now. It might have been Derek Griffin or somebody who kind of reminded us that the subjective needs to happen every single session. It's not a case of doing this massive subjective when you meet a new client and that's the last time you ask them any questions and then the rest are just kind of treatments. A certain amount of questioning and checking up needs to happen. You just got to work out how long in each session. But yeah, so let me know if you are struggling at all, if you think there's just too much information, or maybe you've got a good way of doing it, like sending out pre-questionnaires. So Jonathan, what I'm interested in is, what about, I mean, you've worked with so many athletes up to elite level. Is there any evidence that athletes suffer with more potential sleep conditions than non-athletes, or not? Is it not that easy to say?
Well, I would say, that we could argue that elite athletes and student athletes have more potential excuses to suffer from poor sleep. Having said that, the data is not quite clear on who's suffering more for sleep deprivation, restriction, or sleep issues. What we can say, though, is when I'm looking at a student or a student athlete, if I'm faced with insomnia, most probably that the insomnia complaint will arise from different factor. So I think understanding the factor or the issue at the roots of the sleep problem is massively important. So understanding that if you're faced with a student athlete that is struggling because of a pre-anxiety competition, whereas your student may be facing social anxiety. you will not approach that sleep issue the same way. So to me, it's not who suffers more, who suffers less. The suffering is suffering, and everyone deserves the same health, the same quality of care. And it's on our side to actually, well, you're suffering from insomnia, you're suffering from sleep apnea or restless leg syndrome. You can name them all sleep issues. How do we address them in your own reality setting? To me, sleep is one of the most, if not the most, individualized approach that should be taken care of. Everyone sleep, but everyone sleep differently, and they all have different sleep requirements.
Very interesting. So as always, just look at the individual in front of you and don't presume anything. But you did mention there, for example, stress and anxiety because of pre-competition. That's something, a sporting issue, which an athlete's going to suffer, which is kind of different than if they're not in that, working in that world. Is there any other things which we need to kind of look out for? So that's a massive one in itself, actually, the anxiety, and that's going to change, obviously, depending on how close competitions are. So straight away, when you're talking to the patient, you need to know their plan of when they're racing, what's coming up, and how sleep could be changing depending on how their training sessions are changing as well.
Oh, definitely. That's the reason I said at the beginning that to me, sleep clinicians should be included in the team from day one to the last day. Because if my athlete is good at pre-camp or in the preseason, doesn't mean he will be good when he is in the middle of the season or nearing the playoff. This is when we need to act. There's a lot of work being done previously, but on that very acute phase, how can you make sure that he does not fail or drown under the pressure and then have these sleep problem, not eating problem, maybe an injury, lack of focus, and now he is just sacrificing his entire season because we're not paying attention on the long run. So to me, when it goes for anxiety, I want to know how my athlete are at the beginning of the season and are they doing and coping when it does truly matter, which is qualification for the Olympic Games, World Championship, playoff, uh, whatever it may be. I want to know how they cope. If they have difficulty at that precise moment of their season, then we can prepare in advance. I prefer to be proactive than reactive. If I'm reactive, it's because I missed some red flag beforehand.
Proactive rather than reactive. Nice, great advice. So yeah, there's something out there for anybody who's working with an athlete. If you know, I mean, take the classic 16-week marathon preparation or something, the sleep needs are going to change on a weekly as well as maybe monthly, depending on what type of training they're doing, when they're intensifying, when they're tapering off. So yeah, it's a journey, isn't it? Which you've got to stick with them the whole time and see how things are going. And then that person's own personal life is going to change as well during those 16 weeks. So it's seeing what's happening, and yeah, very interesting. Which makes me wonder, working with somebody, you can ask them these questions. How about wearables? I mean, there's a lot of information that Dr. Olivia Walsh gave us last week, but what's your experience with recommending that the athlete uses a wearable to track these things to see when they do need some kind of intervention?
But when we first start with wearables, so I of course Dr. Walsh probably explained it in a way better way than I will. So we got to make sure that they use it for the right purposes. Uh, First, I'm asking them, we will continue with your wearable, but you will rate your refreshness subjectivity before even laying eyes on your wearable every single morning. And then we can compare. And after that, what I want from the wearables is a accountability tool. So if you're okay with wearing the wearables, then you should be okay with me looking at your data. So here's our my recommendation. You should be sleeping, let's say, around 11:30 till 8 in the morning. And with that, we know that typically you feel refreshed, regardless of your wearables. But now in 2 weeks, I'll see you again, and I want to see the download of these wearables. And oh, what happened on that day? You were in bed at 10, which is not better than 11, even though it's earlier. Earlier does not mean better. And here you're in bed at 1. So to me, the wearable with athletes is a accountability device. Of course, there's always the privacy issue. So we always make sure that the athlete is okay with us watching over his data. So to me, that's how more of I use it. Uh, on the other end, we have a lot of athletes saying, well, I need more stage 3 sleep, that deep sleep or that REM sleep. Again, how someone can improve or increase deep sleep and REM sleep, there's only one known way of doing that, and is sleep depriving someone, which we don't do in the in the world of athlete. So having said that, then it's the educational part that is also important. What are you doing with your data, and how is that gathered is massively important to understand, so we can use it to our advantage, so they do not become a distraction. That's the only thing that matters to me, that we need to make sure they are not a distraction, and that we use the data to our advantage.
That's very interesting, and that, yeah, definitely, as you say, that reflects the information given by Dr. Walsh last week. That yeah, you got to almost screen your individual in front of you to check whether they are susceptible to kind of like the anxiety and the orthosomnia and kind of relying too much on it. So there's education before, like you say, they even let them look at the data.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Imagine you wake up and you're all fresh and you're good and you're ready to take on the day. You look at your watch. Oh, recovery score is 67. What the hell? My day is done. And you have some athletes, because the recovery score is below threshold, they will say, well, crappy day, crappy night, so I should not do A, B, C, and D. If we had a heart rate specialist here, maybe they would say differently. But I would say, well, if you feel good, you know better than a mathematical algorithm. As last time I checked, most athletes that are truthful and honest understate, they know when to pull the trigger for a big, massive training, and they know when to actually lift the foot from the pedal. If you rely entirely on your recovery score from your watch, then you're just completely dependent on what this will do to you. Well, every time I'm below 85, I should not train in zone 3, or every time I'm in above 85, I will always go in zone 3. I mean, this is not how it works. So it's a lot of subjectivity, know your range of sleep, and just be mindful of what it means.
Interesting. Yeah. It's similar, isn't it, to the data given working in your heart rate zones, and we know that a lot of people, it just doesn't tally, it doesn't work. You're being told not to run so fast or to run quicker, and it's like, well, I feel like I'm in my right zone now. So yeah, interesting comparison. I want to go back to something you said, which I think is interesting. Earlier is not better. So first of all, I love the accountability. When I did my 5-week study with Cerebra, that's the one thing which I took away. And it was nice because, as opposed to giving out training programs and recommendations and strength kind of things, which you're trying to get the athlete to adhere to, I was realizing how powerful having to fill out a questionnaire every evening and saying whether I drank coffee, all the other things. I mean, he mentioned so much which could be applicable to an individual, like marijuana, like have you eaten before bed, have you been doing any work where all these questions, and just that questionnaire, doing it every night, suddenly it was like Big Brother, which improved it was though, isn't it? We need it, and I think particularly athletes, they like that structure, and it was really, really useful. It made me realize how useful accountability can be. But yeah, you mentioned earlier is not better. So can you expand on that? Why is it not better if you manage one day to go to bed at 9:30? Do it, no?
Well, so first thing first, I mentioned this to all my athletes. The best hour of sleep are not before midnight. This needs to be understood from the get-go. So a 9 to 5, a 10 to 6, a 11 to 7, midnight to 8 sleeper, to me, they're all the same, as long as these 8-hour window represent the type of sleeper you are. And then, of course, you look at the social responsibility. So can you sleep till 8 a.m. in the morning because of school, work, commute to work, so on and so forth? So let's take the example of an elite athlete that has the flexibility of his or her schedule entirely. Because of that social pressure we put amongst everyone, that the early bird gets the worm and so on and so forth, that the best hour of sleep are before midnight, and that since you're 3 feet high, we always told you to go to bed at a decent hour. What does that even mean, a decent hour? So you have the early birds, you have night owl, you have in between type of sleeper. Your early birds will be those who will be in bed around 9-ish, 10-ish, and they will wake up around 6. You have your night owls, on the other hand, that should be in bed around midnight, 1, and wake up around 8, 9. So if you take that night owl and you put that social conceptualization of sleep on him that he should be in bed at 10. The problem with this is that at 10, he may be tired, but remember, this gets tired, this gets sleepy. If your head is not sleepy, if you're not in a state where you can initiate sleep, you will be in bed, you will toss and turn, and you will stare at your ceiling, and you'll get frustrated, and you'll clock watch. Eventually, you will fall asleep probably around midnight, which is the time you should be in bed in the first place. So all you're doing is extending time in bed, but you're not increasing your sleep. So that's why earlier does not always mean better. And I always compare sleep with food, says the French guy. It's food, whether or not I am hungry. If you put cheese in front of me, I will eat it because I do eat. Whether or not I'm sleepy will dictate if I initiate sleep. Let's say it's 1:36 in the afternoon here. Let's say after the podcast, I am drained and I want to take a nap. Maybe I will, depending on how sleepy I am. I cannot decide to sleep like this because I don't do it. It's something that happens to us. So knowing the type of sleeper you are is crucial and fundamental to actually decide a plan of action as to when will be your boundaries for your window to sleep. So that's why earlier does not always mean better.
Fantastic. There's well, that's chucked about 4 or 5 questions into my mind, which I'm gonna have to try and keep there. There's so much in there. So in an ideal world, potentially then coaches and trainers would know what type of person you are. And we're kind of talking about chronotypes here, aren't we? And adjust what time your morning training is depending on if you are a later kind of sleep or something. In reality, that's probably not going to happen depending on the sport which you, especially if it's a team sport or something. So I want to ask you, therefore, about, is that when you need to start playing around with factors? You can't change your chronotype. You can start influencing the whole circadian rhythm, can't you, by playing around with external factors to make it easier to get to sleep at 10?
Yeah, definitely. And as I mentioned previously, so let's work with an obvious sport, swimmers. So I'm working with student athletes or university team. One of the first thing the coach told me, do not tell them that early morning is detrimental for them because it is what it is with swimming. Entirely true. If I come with my big boots in his office and say, well, my big boot doctor's sleeve says no training in the morning, well, he's going to slam the door in my face next time. So I'm not helping my cause of sleep, and I'm not helping any student athletes. So the idea is bringing the theory. Look, in theory, this is what should be done. Now, because of pool accessibility is only available to you guys in the morning, what is a realistic change that will not impair your performance, but will improve their sleeping habit? So if we can change only one morning, that's already one morning that they don't have to wake up at 5 a.m., that they can ultimately wake up at 7 or 8. That's 2 or 3 hours additionally that you put in your sleep bank. So that's how we would actually do it. Then following that, now we have our optimal schedule that is realistic from their perspective and the availability of the pool. Then we can do a quick screening of who's an early bird, who's a night owl, who's an in between, and then you may focus on your night owl. And look, you have these type of early morning training. How can we shift you just slightly earlier for those nights? No, I'm not going to make you a 10 o'clock sleeper. Let's be again realistic. But if I can transfer you or shift you from a midnight to an 11:15, that's 60 to 45 minute additional sleep that you will gain. And that is reducing the burden instead of looking for the perfect picture, which is unrealistic. You will not obtain it and you will be frustrated by it. So making realistic expectation in order to improve performance is also very important.
The other thing which I thought of as we're talking about, I can't think it was Mike James, the endurance physio, could have been Angela Jackson. There was a conversation on Twitter where I think it was Mike James was saying he works with swimmers, young teenagers who have to be in the pool at like 5 a.m, to get their session in. Because the other thing which we haven't mentioned yet, I'd like to expand on, we know that the circadian rhythm can shift depending on age as well. And ironically, teenagers are more likely to become night owls for that period of time. So that's a problem in itself, isn't it? We're trying to get athletes who could be incredible up in a time where for us would be like getting up at 2 in the morning to do a session. How is there ever any successful athletes created? If because that's the way I guess young teenage athletes always have and probably always will. How do we get
Uh,
around that?
well, how you get around that? So that's the mystery of sports. It just tells you how adaptable a human being can be, and how phenomenal our brain is. Is that an optimal approach? Definitely not. Uh, but you are entirely under that when you say that teenagers are shifting towards a night owl preference. Uh, so when your teenage boy or teenage girl wake up groggy in the morning and always complain in the morning, they're not trying to quote unquote piss you off on purpose. They're just completely misaligned with their circadian rhythm. So a 16-year-old boy or girl that wake up at 6 a.m., it's like you waking up at 4 a.m. You will probably be moody also. And then you put them in cold water at 5. And so that may not be the best thing to do. But again, it's poor accessibility. Can we change that? If not, one of the things we work a lot with is these blue blockers. We work with that to block blue light in the evening, especially that when you talk about teenager, you talk about students. Nowadays with COVID, everything is on a screen. There is no paper anymore. So they spend an atrocious number of hours behind the screen reading and studying, which may delay their bedtime. And then we wake up earlier and earlier for training. So we have all the ingredient for a perfect storm here. So the idea is again coming back, looking at what do we have in front of us, boys, girl, type of sport, what is the accessibility to the pool, to the field, to the ice, to the track, and then we come up with a plan to reduce that burden of realistic expectation.
There has been some studies, I believe, I've looked at the abstracts anyway, suggesting that those who do excel in elite sport maybe naturally have an early morning kind of chronotype, or where they are awake and alert to be able to do those training sessions. So maybe it's kind of a filtering system where the only kids who do survive are the ones who can manage to, operate that early in the morning. And maybe we're missing out on talent by not kind of widening the net a little bit.
Well, obviously, I think we are missing out on some talent, but there's one research, and I think it's by Sargent and Allison and Lastela back in Australia. I have to look this up again. What they did is they look at type of sport, so triathlon, swimmer, rugby, and so on and so forth. And what they uncovered is unconsciously we pick a type of sport that aligns with our chronotype.
Mm-hmm.
So I may have tried swimming at a very early age, but I'm not an early bird. Probably I would have quit that sport and pick my soccer game or my hockey. I'm from Canada after all. So I would have stick with hockey, which is more of a late night, late evening type of sport. So that filtering is done naturally for some athlete. Does that mean that every night owl will never be a good swimmer? No. It means that if you look at the number, you are more likely to like and love swimming if you're an early bird. Does that mean you will be a better athlete? I mean, the data, we don't have the data to actually support that. I would assume so, but again, we don't have any evidence-based research to support that.
Very interesting. There's, I suppose it gives us another tool. One of the most difficult things for therapists, and I'm sure if you're listening live, then you can join in with this, is when we do get the parent and the child athlete coming in, and the parent's really excited because their child athlete's going to be so successful and they love it. And if we can identify that this child is struggling because of the fact that their biological clock is telling them not, to be tired until about maybe 9 in the morning, then maybe with some education we can help changing the lighting in the evening, like you said, the glasses, and help both the parents who are frustrated because little Timmy or Joan or whatever her name is struggling compared to the other kids. So it's quite a very useful tool, isn't it, to help families who are struggling maybe because of sleep issues.
Oh yeah, and the education to me is the biggest portion. 85% of your athlete will only require education and reassurance. So the sleep problem is not as an epidemic of what we are reading. There's an overestimation of poor sleep out there. Having said that, a little education to the student athletes, to the little kid, and to the parents. So every time I work with student athletes that are aged between 13 and 17, every discussion I have or presentation I may do, I always invite the parents, because ultimately little Timmy, as you mentioned, live under the roof of mom and dad. If little Timmy says we need to change every light from white to yellow, well, dad's gonna say, well, who told you that? That's the reason I want parents to also come to these information session. And the nail I hammer the most is the one of chronotype. Your kid is not being a confrontational with you when you told him to go to bed at 10. He's just literally not tired. There's a way to shift him earlier. But do not get in a fight of this is the best hour of sleep and so on and so forth. So to me, that's one of the things. This is a fix through education, not through medication.
Great. Yeah, a lot of information here. I hope you're appreciating this, people. There's so many ways we can help people to come to see us. I thought of something really. Oh, even now, it's bringing me back to something I mentioned in the introduction. In the UK now, we've recently, well, about when was it? 3 weeks ago, we had the daylight saving, and we've kind of put our clocks, changed it. And I've noticed now it's so bright in the evenings, and I've got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and of course they're still having to go to bed at 7 o'clock, but it's so bright. So I'm purposely from 5:30 turning lights off. I'm dimming things, I'm setting mood lighting, you know, just to make sure that they're still getting that natural decline and that kind of lowering of temperature and everything, so they are tired. Otherwise, obviously, they're just going to be wide awake and not ready to go to sleep. So the change in do you notice that with athletes as well? Does it kind of cause a stir the higher up you get in terms of performance when we do suddenly chuck an hour on in summer?
Yeah, so here in Calgary, with daylight saving time, around June, it will still be bright outside at 11 p.m. because we are so up north. So during winter time, I have different type of sleep complaint compared to summertime. And those who pay the price for daylight saving time are kids, because they don't have a 11 p.m. bedtime. They have a 7, 8, 9 p.m. bedtime, but it's completely bright outside. They could still be playing baseball or football easily. But because of daylight saving time, they shouldn't be allowed to do this. We need that light in the morning. The more light we get in the evening, the more difficulty we have to put children in bed, because they are hyper aroused by that light exposure. So this is, to me, the worst case scenario is being on daylight saving time permanently, which would be disastrous.
Which is what governments and kind of the economics are kind of arguing for, isn't it? They're kind of saying,
because there's an economic argument behind that. So more light in the evening means more patio time, means more bar and alcohol time, and later golf time, and so on and so forth. So this is the economic talking. But ultimately, from a health perspective, maybe not the best case scenario.
It's okay, because governments all over the world listen to scientists. It's been proven with COVID. It's fine. We'll have no problem at all. I'm sure, he said ironically. Right, we've got some great questions here have come up. So let me forget about what I want to ask and go to great question. Actually, I want to go to, let's do this. Nikki Mansfield, let's put it up on the screen. Nikki Mansfield says, is sleep deprivation really the only way to increase deep sleep? Could meditation and mindfulness practices keep us to be more likely to reach that deep stage 4? That's a brilliant question. What about those sort
ultimately
of things?
we could. So if you are faced with a struggling athlete with massive anxiety and never reaches that deep stage of sleep, stage 3, definitely, I was joking, of course, with the I need to deprive you. That will be the easiest way. But introducing meditation and mindfulness practice, if the athlete is responding to it, most definitely it's a free habit, it's a free behavior, and it's a very good one that it would be a tool for life. If they are traveling for competition internationally and they are in a foreign environment, then meditation and mindfulness could help reset them and protect their sleep.
There was one thing I was reading that's on my mind recently, and it was, I can't remember who it was. but it was making a quite clear distinction between being relaxed and not stressed and then actually going to sleep. And it's putting kind of a crowbar difference that all of these mindfulness techniques will chill us out, but if our body's not going through that melatonin release and the whole kind of like, if we're depriving the adenosine receptors and all that, then it's not going to make any difference if we're relaxed. We're still not going to sleep. So does it depend on what the reason is the athlete can't sleep? If it's anxiousness, then maybe it's helping, but if it's something else,
if it is something else, yeah, definitely you're not hammering the right nail. But to me, it's having more than one tool in your toolbox. So the athlete will go through a array of difficulties, such as the blues of a poor performance, depression symptom-like, anxiety symptom-like. So for every little issue he may face or she may face, she know which one to pick up out of her toolbox. And you're right saying that relaxation does not necessarily mean sleepiness. But on the other hand, if you're not relaxed, it will be harder for your brain to actually start initiating sleep, because the absence of relaxation may mean that you are in bed too early or you're doing detrimental behavior around your bedtime. So incorporating these meditation and mindfulness practices could help you set that routine bedtime.
I've definitely, it was just talking with Amy, our guest next week, Dr. Amy Bender. I find that having different techniques, kind of meditative approach helps if you're waking, when these people, I wake up during the night, and it's that moment where it's like, are you going to stay awake for an hour and a half now getting stressed out, or are you going to be able to use a mindful technique to go back to sleep again? So I think that's when those techniques can really help, can't it, to help you get back to sleep?
They can absolutely. So to me, I call that, so it's normal to wake up first in the middle of the night, so everyone needs to understand that. So whatever the awakening may be from, bathroom, a cramp, nightmare, whatever it may be, noise, if you wake up after 4 hours of sleep, it is to be anticipated that you will not initiate sleep within that 15 minutes that you did at the first onset. So you will slowly go in that transition state. You know, that transition state where you know you're not asleep, but you know you're not awake and your brain is wandering. My point on this is enjoy it. Your brain is going places and you're almost high free. So just go with the flow, and you are in a transitional state. You will go back to sleep. Stressing about the fact that you're not falling asleep as fast as you used to, which is completely normal, is the detrimental way of thinking. I should be back asleep within that 15 minutes. Well, wait a minute, you just slept for 4 hours. So how should you be back asleep within that 15 minutes that you did when you were not sleeping for that 16 hours? So that's just unrealistic. So putting back into perspective. And then if you have a lot of struggle, definitely the meditation and mindfulness practice could become handy at that time.
Great answer. Great question, Nikki. Thank you for that. Becky's followed up a question here. Becky says, let me put it up on the screen. Becky says, I'm curious about athletes that live in places like Northern Finland, where I'm going in 2 weeks' time. Really looking forward to that have a larger exposure to darkness and how this affects their sleep habits and health. Yeah, how do they survive?
A good question. So I haven't worked with a athlete from Finland, Norton, but we all know their reality. So I would assume that they are professional with working with these little tools here. So bright light exposure, which are 10,000 lux. I would assume that they're on the dot when the clock hit 8 in the morning. They are trying to expose themselves to light as much as they can. The same way, basically, we are doing here in Calgary when it's bright outside until 11. We're trying to shield ourselves from light, whereas they will try to expose themselves to light. Is that as efficient as the natural light? Again, I doubt it, but that's the best they can do. They will not change the way the sun rotates around the world.
Olivia Walsh was very big on the light. She's a big fan of using light, and it seems to be such a simple tool if you do it the right way, whether it's more in the morning or less at night time. It's a real low-hanging fruit that people can work with. So yeah, I imagine that we'll have to find somebody from Northern Finland, Becky, and see what they do. I imagine they're probably quite experts in managing in that way. Thank you. Great question, Becky. Nikki has a question that I wanted to ask as well about banking hours. I've seemed to find different beliefs or suggestions whether banking hours works, or So I'm interested in your reply to this. So Nikki says, do the extra hours banked have an expiry period? E.g., if I slept an extra hour each day for 2 weeks while on holiday, would all 14 hours be available for me to use, inverted commas, when I go back to work afterwards?
The sleep bank to me is to counteract the I'm always under sleep debt and I need to catch up on sleep. So instead of approaching sleep that way, it's more of if you're able to bank your sleep, you will inevitably face a poor night during your week. So if you're already sleep deprived or sleep restricted, that poor night will just exacerbate its consequences. Whereas if you are sleep banking, that poor night will have futile consequences on your behavior the following day. The way I explain that to athletes is when you will go to the Olympic, the last night or the night before your competition, assume that you will not sleep as usual. You will have a shorter night most likely. But if we have banked your sleep for weeks in, weeks out before, that poor night will be less detrimental than if we did not pay attention to your sleep bank. So to me, sleep is an investment, a long-term investment, instead of oh, I can sacrifice an hour here and there everywhere every week. So changing that paradigm of how we see sleep is important. And then it just normalize also these poor nights. Having 7 good nights out of 7 on a weekly basis is straight up lying. Nobody has that. So having that bank system on your side will help you go through these little suboptimal nights.
Great answer. I hope that's helped, Nikki. And if you have got 2 weeks of holiday coming up, then yeah, great. Use it. Bank those hours. How lovely. Right, I'm conscious that it's 3 minutes to 9 now. There's so much more that I could obviously have asked you about and had you share your experience with. But ultimately, though, hopefully there's an awful lot of information there. I wanted to ask about blah, 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 blah. Oh, I didn't mention that. But time has beaten us. So all of this is about the person coming through our door, maybe with pain, maybe with performance, lack of performance, they're plateauing or something, and they've come to us for help. What are some of we've already kind of mentioned, but in summary, what are kind of the top tips that we should be looking out for if an athlete does come to us with some kind of performance issues? We've mentioned maybe giving them a questionnaire or something, but what are the kind of the top 5 which could help us highlight whether some kind of education could help, and indeed how can we educate them? What's the top 5 be?
Ultimately, anyone that works with athletes, depending on the relationship you have with your athlete, a simple "how you doing today" will go a long way in 2022. That opens the door to our refresh. Are you? How good do you? How bad do you feel? Any pain lately? You're dealing with athletes. Everyone has aching, but they can make the difference between I'm sore, I'm achy, or I'm injured. How's life? How's work? How's school? Now you're looking into that mental health well-being. So only by these very quick questions, you've assessed pain, you've assessed their sleep, you've assessed their mental health well-being, and that can give you a wide scope of how they're doing. And if you feel, and you've worked with a lot of patients and a lot of athletes to know which flag to actually pinpoint. So if your athlete is mentioning, well, my hamstring is always bugging me, school is all right, work is all right, family is good, there's not much to go on the mental health state. So you always go after what's the most obvious, as you mentioned, the hanging fruit. So he disclosed something about achy, soreness, injury like, you go there. If it's more on the sleep, I'm always tired, you go on that. If it's about, well, not that great at home, not that great with the kids, not that great with wife, husband, work, sport related, and you feel it's a mental health or mental well-being issue, then you refer to a family doc. So we keep it simple when it comes to addressing the athlete. It's not always about the data. So I'm not giving my athletes always these questionnaire. I do periodically, so monthly, but other than that, every time I see an athlete, there's these questions. I'm assessing it, but subjectively through our discussion. And this is how we build the relationship. It's not through a paper, it's through human face to face and how you do it. And that will go a long way.
It seems to be a common theme. Something definitely I've picked up from the hour of I had the pleasure of spending with you tonight is, working with the person not expecting huge changes at first, just asking them the simple questions and then extracting the information in a really kind of context-based way. Yeah, all makes great sense. And also, just in summary, then watching out maybe for too much dependence on wearables, which we've talked about tonight. That could be a factor, which I think, particularly with runners I know, if they're not checking out their latest run with Garmin and stuff, then it could easily just translate over to the sleep as well. So that's something to look out for. Knowing their chronotype is something we've mentioned as well. That's interesting. Just not trying to force something if it doesn't need to be that way. Or if it does need to be that way, then looking at how you could play around with changing factors like light. That was a good one as well. We didn't have time to talk about coffee either, but that's a whole nother issue as well, isn't it?
It is. You know what? Because there is so much to cover, I'm willing to do a part 2. You know.
I think we're going to have to do a part 2. You know, I mean, when I agreed to do when I jumped at the chance of doing the 5-week study with Amy and Cerebra, I was trying to think out, because I'm a bit of a geek, obviously, and I was like, I can't just give 5 weeks or 35 nights of data. I want to put something in there as well. So I did the first week. I drink a lot of coffee. I've had to, because I'm a night owl, and that's how I get by until now, where I understand now sleep wonderfully. But I mean, so for me, it was a case of, right, let's do a week of taking data with my normal 4 shots a day of normally a flat white or maybe a Cortada, depending on where I'm buying it. And then I cut it out. I just went cold turkey. So we had 2 weeks of getting it out of the system. Then there was a further 2 weeks of, in theory, very little caffeine in the system. So that's going to be and I was trying to keep all other variables fairly constant to see how much effect there was on the different stages of sleep by taking caffeine out. But as we will see next week, it's not that simple keeping everything else consistent, because life gets in the way, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's knowing your boundaries. It's flexible.
Especially in a world pandemic, when the rest of your family is getting COVID, when it's half term and kids are suddenly at home all day long instead of at school. That was interesting. So yeah, and that was a big take home as well. And something which you reminded me is you're working with humans with lives, and you can't dictate what they've got to do without asking them how the veils are changing and being flexible. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Real pleasure spending time with you, and it's lovely. I'll take that offer of a part 2. Check your emails. I'll give you a date and time. That'd be great.
Perfect. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, and I was serious about that take 2. And just a quick note for Becky, for your last question: there's no such thing as getting too much sleep. We are in a sleep-deprived society, so let's get that sleep in. You are not getting too much, trust me. So until next time, it was a pleasure.
From the horse's mouth. I think Olivia mentioned that in a few months' time, the kind of stuff you're doing at the moment, maybe you'll have some results coming through. So it might be interesting to coincide with that, to hear what you've all been up to. Right. Thank you so much again, Jonathan. If you stick around, I just want to say thank you to personally once I've closed down the live lounge. Thank you, everyone, for joining us live. Really appreciate it. I know in this day and age, doing something live is just unheard of. Nothing we watch on live TV. Do they even still do that anymore? It's all just pause and play, isn't it? So it's flattering and really keeps me going to think that you guys do give up your time to join us live. It's great. We're keeping the world alive. If you listen to the podcast, because I do try and get these out, especially this month, the day afterwards, and you do want to join us live because you've enjoyed the interaction that you've heard, and it's a chance to fire questions at the guests, then the final week of our Sleep Awareness Month will be next week. I'm actually going to be in Finland, so I'm touching wood all the time, just hoping the internet connection, everything's fine. And it will be with Dr. Amy Bender, who was responsible for this whole Sleep Awareness Month, because she got me into it for being a guest back in August last year. That's what made me do the sleep study, and that's where we are now. So the results of that sleep study using the in-home polysomnogram, which was measuring brain waves, so we'll have that interesting comparable with the information from that compared to your Garmin and Fitbit and Oura Ring and that sort of stuff. So it should be a great show, and it will be happening at 8 p.m. GMT +1 next Tuesday, which will be the 26th, if you fancy staying up for that. But please don't sleep deprive yourself if it doesn't fit into your time zone. I don't want to be responsible for that. If you can't, then that's why we do it. That's why we download it as a podcast. So yeah, do please listen and enjoy, and leave a rating and a review on your favorite podcast app. So on behalf of myself and Jonathan, thank you very much again, Jonathan. and
Yeah,
hopefully we'll see some of you next Tuesday. Take care of yourself.